Greetings and welcome to Captain John's almost live story half hour, brought to you from the spring-like village of Little River, Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm Jonathan White and I'm here to read you another story from my adventure book series, Everyone Said I Should Write a Book. So what I'm going to do is continue on from last week's reading, which is something I rarely do because my books are not organized in any chronological order. Each story is written to stand on its own. But I thought this would be kind of fun to do as one long story. So, the idea here, as you know by now, if you've seen any of my other videos, is to kind of take you away for a little while from the craziness that's going on in the world with this lockdown and stay-at-home coronavirus epidemic. Anyway, this story today is called Busted. It continues from last week where I had arrived back in America after my journey across Asia and borrowed some money and flown back to Afghanistan, and now I'm arrived in New York with my goods that I bought in Afghanistan, with some of them. Anyway, this story is called Busted. I should put my glasses on, and I think this is just going to be in one part. So there won't be a part two to this one. All right, this is taken from my second book. Everyone said I should write another book. Okay, Busted. Had you been standing in the spectator area above the customs hall at JFK International Airport on the morning of March the 18th, 1972, one person would have stood out among the hundreds lined up for baggage inspection. You would have seen a tall, skinny young man wearing a bright embroidered Afghan sheepskin coat and a leather cowboy hat, carrying two bulging, battered suitcases. He had long, wavy hair to his shoulders, a bushy beard, and lines of exhaustion on his face. You would have seen him moved up to the inspector, a brief conversation follow, and then all the people behind him move away to the back of other lines, some grumbling. "So, what was you doing in Afghanistan this time?" the inspector asked me suspiciously in a heavy New York accent. "Your passport shows you were there just a few weeks ago." 2 months earlier, following a long and harrowing trip overland from India to Istanbul in the winter cold and snow, and then by plane to Philadelphia, I had returned from Kashmir in the Himalaya mountains. Deciding to go back to Afghanistan to buy local products and start an import business, I had borrowed $5,000 and flown to Kabul on Pan Am and Afghan Airways, a very different experience from my long overland adventure the year before. Now, after an amazing 2-week buying trip, I was headed back home to New Hope, just north of Philadelphia. The past 24 hours had been spent flying from Kabul to Beirut, then Paris, London, and New York. I was exhausted and still weak from the dysentery I had contracted a few months earlier in Kashmir. When the customs agent saw that I had flown in from Kabul, Afghanistan, he loudly told the people in my line that he will be a while with me and to take their baggage to another agent. Well, I went on a buying trip. I'm starting an import business from Afghanistan. The bulk of my goods are being air freighted back, I said proudly, assuming my persona of international businessman. I suppose my long hair and distinctive coat were not indicative of a business mogul, as he appeared far from impressed. "Afghanistan? Now what would anyone want to go there for?" he sneered. This was long before the Russians invaded, the Taliban were 20 years in the future, and very few had even heard of the small, landlocked Asian country. I didn't say anything, but I knew I was in for a hard time. The hundreds of sheepskin coats and beaded dresses, vests, hats, and other items I had bought were being air freighted to Philadelphia and would arrive in a few days. These exotic-looking, intricately embroidered coats and clothes were greatly prized by the hippies of the day. Teenagers wore them, trendsetters wore them, rock stars wore them. But I had brought 2 suitcases of special items on the plane with me. Mr. Inspector ordered me to put them on his table and open them. A buzz had started in the large customs area as the arriving passengers in line could sense that someone was in trouble. People were looking at me, anticipating something unusual. I opened the first case, and amongst the few clothes was a mass of rings, necklaces, and jewelry of all shapes and sizes, different colored stones, silver and gold chains, little jeweled boxes, pendants, earrings, hundreds of pieces. A gasp went up from the people around me. I opened the second old suitcase, and there was more of the same. Although none of the pieces was pretty valuable, it still looked like the takings of a major jewel heist. Well, this is part of the stuff I bought here, over there, and here's a receipt, I said, thrusting a wrinkled piece of paper at him. It's all legitimate and signed and stamped by the Afghan authorities. Now, I had thought there might be a problem with customs at JFK, so for $2 baksheesh, I bribed an Afghan official to put some stamps on my handwritten receipt. It looked important, but didn't really mean anything. The agent was pulling things out of my suitcases onto his table. He was especially intrigued by the couple of dozen small engraved metal boxes I had. They were of different shapes, some round, some oval, with intricate carvings and glass jewels attached. They were made of cheap metal, but looked very pretty and unusual. I had bought everything in my suitcases from a small, dark, dusty shop in the Kabul bazaar, and had paid $100 for all of it. Now the little boxes were lined up in a row in front of me, and I looked up at the large glass windows where people waiting for their friends and family could see them going through customs. There was a crowd staring down at me as they sensed something happening. Some of the people who had already checked through customs were waiting to see what would happen to this strangely dressed hippie with the bizarre luggage. Mr. Inspector took the lid off one little box and looked inside. He rubbed a finger around, and when he withdrew it, there was a fine brown powder on his fingertip. He sniffed it, and then to my amazement, he licked it. Reaching under the table with his other hand, he must have activated a signal switch. He said nothing, but quickly opened the other little boxes. They were all thinly coated inside with this brown powder. I had not looked inside them in Kabul, just bought them all and stuffed them into my suitcase in the bazaar. Now I started to sweat. Look, I bought them as a lot. I never opened them. I'm a legitimate businessman, I protested. He looked me up and down and chuckled. Right, sure you are. You're bringing in hashish. It looks like hashish, smells like hashish. We have a small lab here to confirm this. You're not going anywhere except jail. 3 uniformed men showed up, had a quick discussion with the agent. 2 of them stuffed my boxes in a bag and hurriedly walked away. The other stood right next to me to make sure I didn't try to leave. Now there were hundreds of spectators above, all crowding to see a drug bust. And very few travelers were leaving the customs area. This was too entertaining. I couldn't believe what was happening. One minute I was a legitimate international importer, the next I was being busted and could spend years in jail. My mind went blank, and I was oblivious to the people looking at me. There was nothing I could do. Mr. Customs Agent was reveling in the attention of his buddies, all of whom seemed delighted to have been there when this major drug bust went down. 10 minutes went by, half an hour. Then about an hour later, the 2 officers walked back with a bag of my deadly little jeweled boxes. A hush came over the huge customs hall. The spectators above stopped banging on the tall glass windows. I opened my mouth to proclaim my innocence, but realized my protests would do no good. I had inadvertently condemned myself to jail. I was literally shaking. They placed the bag on the table next to me. One of the officers looked at me with an expression of bemusement and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, sir, it's highly unusual, but at this time it is not illegal to bring dried camel dung powder into the USA." My legs went weak with relief. The whole place, hundreds of people, burst out laughing, and I turned to look at my customs agent, who had been preening himself for the past hour. His face literally went green. He had licked the stuff, had eaten camel dung. Some people came over and slapped me on the back. One man asked, why was I bringing camel crap into the country? Well, they used dried camel patties for a few things in Afghanistan, said I. Making fires, fertilizing their crops, even as a cure for dysentery. I guess over the years, the inside of my little boxes just got coated with it from everyday use. I stuffed my jewelry and boxes back into my suitcase. Mr. Agent was nowhere to be seen. He'd hurried off, probably to the men's room to be sick. I stuffed all the jewelry back into my suitcase. Another agent stamped my passport and grinned at me. I made my way to the exit, surrounded by a whole crowd of people. When I got out of the customs area, a bunch of spectators who'd been watching the drama unfold cheered. They thought it was incredibly funny when the nasty agent turned green and almost threw up. I made my way through the crowds, laughing and joking, and climbed into a cab. As we drove to Grand Central Station for the train ride to Philadelphia, I started shaking again. What if it had really been hashish? And how nervous should I be when I cleared my hundreds of uncured, smelly sheepskin coats through customs in Philadelphia in a few days? So, that's the end of my story, except that this is one of the little jeweled boxes that I have kept now for 50 years. It's always traveled with me. It's just a little oval box. Oh, and inside are a couple of pieces of Afghan jewelry that I bought back, some rather unusual rings. But this is the little box that nearly got me busted. So I hope you enjoy that story. I think next week we'll go back to sea, and I'll probably have a story about a rather unusual boat delivery trip. So, hope you've enjoyed this one. Don't forget to subscribe. There's not a part 2 to this. This was the whole story. So, please subscribe and click on the little bell there. And if you've got any comments, you can put them underneath the video, or you can Facebook me if you're one of my Facebook friends. And if you'd like to be one of my Facebook friends, please reach out to me. So, once again, Jonathan White signing off, and I'll see you in a week. Have a great week. Bye.